this may catch you by surprise, but I think it's really important. And I think it's so important that it's one of the very first questions that I ask a client that is thinking about working with me. And the question I ask them the regular questions too, like what are your three most important goals, and you know, what's your history, and that kind of thing. Where do you want to go with this, and how much time do you have to commit to it? All the normal stuff. But this is one that's not so normal, but I think it's super important. It's important for me to know as a coach and trainer, but it's also incredibly important for you to know. And if you haven't thought about it, which I'm going to bet you haven't, I'm going to bet you tell me what everybody else tells me, which isn't true. And the question is, before we start this adventure together, what are your limitations? Where were you going to tell me no? Where are you going to say stop? What limits do you have? And all too often, I won't say always, but close enough to always, I'm going to round it up to always. Everybody tells me I don't have any limits. I will do whatever it takes to reach my goals. Whatever it takes. Now, I laud that kind of enthusiasm, but I have to call out the lack of awareness. Everybody has limits. Everybody. And so when someone tells me, I'll do whatever it takes, I say, anything? And they say, yes. And I say, will you punch your mother in the throat if it meant victory? And they look at me like, that's crazy. That's anything includes everything. And I say, well, will you have homosexual sex if it means victory? And that apparently, with the Weinstein case and the Me Too movement, apparently that's pretty well the story out in Hollywood. If you want to roll, you got to be willing to have some kind of sex for it. So that's not too far out of the question. And if you go to Hollywood and you want to be a starlet, uh, and you have that limit, it's good to know that about yourself. It's good to know that maybe that some doors are going to be closed to you because you have a limit, and you're not going to do that. And it's also good for you to know in your quest for whatever goals you have in the weight room and in competition what your limits are. You should know them beforehand. You should know at this point, I'm going to say no. If this is what it takes, then I don't want it that bad. And there is a point for all of us, every one of us. The danger, and this is why I think you should do it, because if you take on the attitude, I'll do whatever it takes, and you fall through with that, you may be taking some unwarranted risks. So typically, one thing with gaining weight and getting heavy is it really has an adverse effect on your blood pressure. And so guys will say, well, I'm only going to gain weight up until my blood pressure hits X. And then I gotta stop gaining weight because, I got a family, I got a life, I got a wife. I can't just have a heart attack because I wanted to bench press a lot of weight. And so they set a limit. When my blood pressure gets to X, I'm going to back off to gaining weight. And then as they come closer and closer to that, if they're not if they weren't clear with themselves and honest with themselves about their limits, and if they didn't set a limit in the first place, if they then there kind of is this tendency to let it slide a little. If I didn't set a clear-cut limit and I'm not disciplined enough to stick to it, when my blood pressure goes higher than I ever thought it would because I'm gaining weight, and that puts stress on the heart. at any age, you become more and more likely, without those clear limits on paper, said out loud, to let it climb higher and a little higher. Because I'm almost at my goal. I'm almost what I want to weigh. So I'm just going to let it, I'm going to let my blood pressure go a little higher than I kind of want to or should. And that danger goes with other things as well. You start to give yourself too much leeway, and you end up in a place that you wish you weren't in. If you don't set the limits and know what the limits are, you're in danger of going too far with something. Maybe it's time you don't spend with your kids. Maybe you're saying, I'm only going to put this much time a week into this adventure. And then as you get closer and closer to your goals, it takes more and more time. Where do you get that time? Take it from your family, take it from your job, take it from somewhere. And if you say, well, if you set those limits and you mean them and you understand them and you know that about yourself, you're less likely to break somebody's heart. Some little kid's waiting for you to be at home and you're at the gym. Some little kid's waiting for you to watch them jump into a pool or go to a soccer game, watch them play soccer. And as uninteresting as that may be to you, and as little as that moves you towards your goals, it matters to some little kid. Probably a great deal. Maybe not. But this is why you got to know yourself and you got to know your family. You got to know your situation. You got to set your limits. I'm leaving the gym at 7:30 because I got to be there at 8 to watch my kid play soccer. Or whatever it is. It doesn't matter what it is. It doesn't matter if the goals are important, a little bit important, or not important at all. You just have to set those limits. You have to know yourself. So this requires that you look inside yourself. So this is good for lots of reasons. One, if you set limits, it's going to help you to stick with them if you write them down and you say them out loud. If you're just like, well, I won't do anything stupid. You will. You will. You might. You might, okay? Lots of people do. They just keep pushing it, keep pushing it. And I notice because I know guys that have had heart attacks and are no longer with us because they didn't either set the limits or they didn't know what the limits should be or they didn't have the discipline to stick to the limits. So one thing I think will help you do the right thing is at the beginning set the limits. You can always amend them. You can always go back on what you said. It's your life. But it helps you have clarity about where you should have limits. And you should. You should. You should have limits on what you will and won't do for this goal. And the second thing that it does, as it may protect you from going too far in your zeal and zest for victory, and that catches us all. Everybody wants to win. And the closer you get to it, the more you want it. And you tend to look the other way on your limits or what you said you were limits. The other thing it does, it makes you look at yourself. And it makes you ask yourself, where am I with this whole thing? And that's always good. It's always good to know where you stand with yourself. And to set limits, you have to know. You have to know what is going to stop you from getting what you want. And those are all good things. So you should do that. I don't like to tell people what they should do because it presupposes that I know what's best for you, and I do not. I do not. But this makes a lot of sense to me, and I would encourage you to do it too. I do ask it of all the people that want to work with me. How far are we going to go with this? What's going to stop you? Are you willing to do this? Are you willing to do that? Are you willing to do this? Will you do that? What about this? And if you don't have any limits, while I laud that enthusiasm and commitment, you know, one great thing to ask is, will you cheat? Will you lie about something? Will you cheat if you know the bar is loaded 20 pounds light and you don't say anything and you take credit for that lift, is that a limit for you, or are you okay with that? You know, are you willing to break the rules? We had a sad situation at Ohio State when one of our line coaches was having a discussion about holding with some kids, and I wasn't eavesdropping. It was just loud enough that I could hear from where I was. And one of the kids was talking about holding and cheating. And the coach said to him in no uncertain terms, son, if you ain't cheating, you don't want to win bad enough. And so that's one way of looking at limits and things. But are you willing to cheat to win? Is that a limit for you? These are good questions, to ask yourself. And I'm encouraging you to do so. It will protect your health, maybe your family and relationships, your job. Who knows what it will. It's just a good practice. So if you haven't done it already, wherever you are now in quest of your goal, think about what your limits are. If you have any. Maybe you don't. I have met people that haven't. And I've met people I know people that have passed. They didn't have any limits. Death was not a limit. Risking their life was not a limit. And I'm sad to say that there were times when I made that. I took some risks that should have been limited. And so that's how I know this is important. I made that mistake. I made this mistake I'm telling you about. And you don't have to, because I'm telling you about it now. Nobody told me to do this. I wish they had. And I'm lucky that I didn't have to suffer consequences more adverse than they were. So think to yourself what your limits are. Write them down. Tell people. Explore. You can always amend and change later. They're not a commitment that you are bound with. You can make small changes, but I would suggest that you don't. Hold yourself to the discipline and think this through. And thanks for listening.